shout out to you against Stan, but you been on that lately? I said, I asked you that. I said, where did that come from out of nowhere? Did your pops talk to you? What the hell happened? Joe just came back like, you know what? Black Americans, we're not getting our respect out of nowhere. I've been here for like 3 years, and he wasn't on that. This past year, he was.
You got to be on it. You got to be, if you on that, you got to be more vocal about it now because other things are visible and vocal.
Got it. You said that.
Like, there's too many people feeling comfortable getting on stake in some of these other right-wing spots, just talking about, yeah, you fucking American blacks, you ain't got no culture, American black. It's becoming a thing, what they're saying about black Americans. It is. But
and it's visible.
Here in America, yeah.
Really?
I'm seeing more of it. I'm seeing more of it. That conversation they having on law, I'm not bringing it up right now because
please,
because I'd rather not. But yeah, they every time Kai unlocks a new achievement, there's quiet whispers about it because he's probably the most famous person that has said, y'all black people don't have no culture.
He said that?
Yeah.
Oh. I didn't know
He's not the only person. I'm not trying to highlight him saying it because I really like him, and I think that's just an education thing. Some of these other people, I don't feel that way about. So that's all.
So people real quick, do you feel like when you hear like...
You said people have been saying that for a long time. What have they been saying for a long time?
I haven't heard
American
that.
black people, we don't really have a culture because...
What?
Yeah.
Well, let me, before this spins, because we can't trace our lineage. So, like, if you take people from Jamaica, or I'm not Jamaica, let's say somebody from Ireland or somebody from Italy or somebody from wherever, they can literally go back to where their ancestors lived. Like, you can go to Italy and see your upbringing, your roots. We got stolen. So a lot of us can't necessarily go back to Ghana or go back to Nigeria or go somewhere to find out where our real lineage come from.
Now we can.
That's been a thing for a long time.
Do you... Question, real quick, Joe.
How many years?
Right.
How many years need to be established for culture to be established?
I would argue.
I go to my family grave site and see buttons from 1710.
Really? I would argue that American.
That's dope.
That's fire.
Everybody can't do that.
So I don't.
That's why it means different for him.
No, I said that's dope.
Yeah,
a lot of people can't do that. That's fire.
One thing I noticed is whenever a foundational black American says, I can trace my lineage back to the 1800s, 1700s, 1600s here in the United States, people in the room always sound surprised like, wow, not many people can do that. No, there's a lot of foundational black Americans out here who can. In this clip, Joe Budden makes an interesting point that I think deserves more attention. He said that now, more than ever, foundational black Americans need to be more vocal about who we are and where we come from. Not because anyone needs permission to identify themselves, but because if you don't define yourself, somebody else will. And that is exactly what's happening. For years, we've heard people say that foundational black Americans have no culture, that we're just a fringe internet movement, or that we're simply generic black Americans. None of those claims hold up. Foundational black Americans are the descendants of the people enslaved in what became the United States, followed by generations who endured black codes, Jim Crow, racial terrorism, redlining, exclusion from the New Deal benefits in many cases, discriminatory lending, and other government-sanctioned barriers. We're talking about a community numbering more than 40 million people, not a small online subgroup. The first step towards any serious conversation about reparations is delineation. You cannot compensate a specific historical injustice if you refuse to identify the people who experienced that injustice and their descendants. Just take a moment and think about every other reparative program in American history. They weren't offered to everyone. They identified a harmed population first. If the government compensated Japanese Americans who were incarcerated during World War II, it didn't send checks to every Asian American. If a settlement is created for veterans exposed to toxic chemicals, it isn't paid to everyone who has served in the U.S. military. Eligibility is tied to the specific harm. The same principle applies here to reparations for American chattel slavery and its aftermath. When people say reparations should go to all black people, they're actually undermining the legal and moral argument. The claim being made by many reparations advocates isn't that every black person who lives in America today suffered the same historical injustice. The claim is that there is a specific lineage whose ancestors were subjugated to slavery in the United States, and then generations of legally enforced discrimination afterwards. Those are two very different arguments. Many black immigrants arrived after the major civil rights reforms of the 1960s. Many came voluntarily, seeking educational or economic opportunities that previous generations of black Americans fought to make possible. Now, that doesn't diminish their contributions or experiences. Many immigrants also experience discrimination and racism in America today. Still, experiencing racism today is not identical to inheriting the specific economic losses associated with centuries of slavery, segregation, legalized exclusion, and discriminatory public policy directed at a distinct population. That is why lineage matters. And here's another conversation that people are finally starting to have. Foundational black Americans often absorb stereotypes created under one broad racial label. When crime statistics, media narratives, or social problems are discussed, the public often doesn't distinguish between different black ethnic groups. The stereotypes frequently fall on all black Americans collectively. At the same time, many immigrant communities understandably maintain their distinct national identities. You'll hear people proudly identify as Haitian, Jamaican, Nigerian, Ghanaian, Trinidadian, Ethiopian, Dominican, etc. et al. They preserve their languages, customs, family histories, and cultural organizations. Newsflash, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, preserving your heritage is something every community should be free to do. But it does create an interesting dynamic. When celebrating cultural achievements, people often emphasize their specific national background. When discussing immigration policy, foreign affairs, or homeland issues, those national identities remain central. Meanwhile, foundational black Americans don't have another national identity to switch to. Our family history was forged here over centuries. That means we don't have the same ability to separate ourselves from broader stereotypes by saying, actually, I'm from somewhere else. Our ancestral homeland is the United States. That reality is one reason many people argue that clearly recognizing foundational black American identity is vitally important. It allows discussion of a unique historical experience rather than treating every black community in America as though it shares the same history, political priorities, or policy goals. And that distinction matters because communities often organize around different priorities. Some organizations focus heavily on immigration policy. Others prioritize foreign policy related to their countries of origin. Others focus on international development. Foundational black American advocacy has often centered on issues such as the racial wealth gap, reparations, housing discrimination, educational inequities, criminal justice reform, and the lasting effects of historical policies aimed at specifically deterring and harming the descendants of American slavery. Now, those policies can overlap, but they're not always identical. That's why delineation is not about exclusion. It's about precision. It's about making sure the people who suffered a specific historical injustice can be identified when discussing remedies for that injustice. If everyone is included regardless of historical lineage, then the original claim becomes much harder to define and defend. Whether someone supports reparations or opposes them, the conversation becomes more coherent when everyone agrees on who the policy is intended to address. That is not division. That's just how public policy normally works. So when Joe Budden says it's important for foundational Black Americans to speak openly about our identity, I think he's pointing out something bigger than a hashtag or an online debate. He's talking about historical clarity. Communities that know who they are generally better positioned to preserve their history, advocate for their interests, and make their case in the public square. Now, you don't have to erase anyone else's story just to tell your own. But recognizing foundational Black American identity doesn't deny anyone else's heritage. It simply acknowledges that the descendants of American slavery have a distinct history, a distinct set of historical claims, and for many advocates, a distinct claim for reparative justice. And before any serious discussion about reparations can move forward, that distinction must be understood. Because you can't repair a specific historical harm if you refuse to identify the people who inherited it. And that's all I have to say about that. In unrelated news, be sure to join me tonight for a Fire Time live talk where we will discuss the intersectionality between foundational Black American delineation and Pan-Africanism. For he who has an ear to hear, let him hear.